This is Renee Radusky presenting Reverend Thomas Bray and Parish Libraries in the American South, Philosophy, Theology, and Practical Application. This presentation is a partial fulfillment of requirements for completion of Library 204 at San Jose State University. This paper presents the story of the Reverend Thomas Bray, the English Anglican clergyman responsible for founding 39 libraries in the American colonial South, beginning in 1696. It is a clerical story of missionary zeal, but also the tale of a man deeply influenced by utilitarian theories of knowledge. It is a practical tale of trying to provide needed books to a rising professional class, training in business, medicine, and the law. It is a story of failure and fatigue, as with Bray's death, his libraries became antiquated and lost their usefulness. It is a story strongly rooted in the history of 17th century Europe, where Bray founded more than 60 parish libraries in England and Wales. And it is a story paralleled in the history of colonialism, for Bray also founded libraries in places as far and distant from each other as Newfoundland, Antigua, and what is present-day Calcutta. It is the story of a man who spent only 10 weeks on American colonial soil, and did the rest of his work through what we might call today networking and fundraising. This paper and the story it tells is important for 3 reasons. 1, it tells a fascinating and little-known part of American history. 2, it gives us an interesting lens, the story of the development of the library, through which to reflect on the larger history of a particular part of our country. And 3, it gives us an opportunity to see how one institution, in this case the library, was established as an expression of the particular society in which it was developed. In reality, Reverend Bray was 2 things: a clerical missionary interested both in spreading the gospel in the New World and stopping the encroachment of other religions, and a student of philosophy who was deeply influenced by Francis Bacon's quest for knowledge, and the idea that the development of knowledge should have practical ends. The result was libraries that both gave ministers the texts they needed to propagate the faith, and gave parishioners practical and useful books that the burgeoning Southern gentry needed to support professional development, or in other words, books that were needed to support a rising professional class. Reverend Bray is best known for founding 2 missionary societies, one based solely in England and one comprised to make imprints on English colonies. Both had great impacts on the development of libraries on either side of the Atlantic. In England, the Society for the Promotion of Christian Knowledge became a fundraising arm to raise money for clerical libraries in England and the New World. It was so successful that when Reverend Bray returned to England in 1700, he founded the Society for the Propagation of the Gospel in Foreign Parts, which in part raised money for the parish libraries of the American South. On both sides of the Atlantic, Reverend Bray impacted the way government did its work. In England, Reverend Bray worked tirelessly for the 1709 passage of the Parochial Libraries Act, which to this day governs parochial libraries established for ministers of the Church of England in Great Britain. In the colonial South, the first laws regulating libraries in Maryland and South Carolina contained striking similarities to essays written by Bray himself, calling for, among other things, having ministers responsible for the protection of libraries, providing copies of catalogs to provincial governors, and calling for formal visits by missionary clerics. What is perhaps most interesting about this story is that in some cases, small parish libraries became lending libraries from parishioners needing books in no way related to spiritual matters. And in 2 fascinating cases, these libraries became the first provincial libraries of the American South. We have religion, the secular quest for knowledge, and the beginnings of government oversight, all working together in fluid manners, and all through the example of the library. I would be remiss if I did not tell the story of 2 of the first provincial libraries of the American South, the tales of Annapolis, Maryland, and Charleston, South Carolina. The most important of the Maryland Bray libraries was that in Annapolis, established by members of the royal family and designated as a provincial library and kept in the State House until a fire in 1704. As a provincial library, the books were for circulation beyond the confines of parish membership, but still overseen by an Anglican cleric. And in South Carolina, the assembly was unique in that it, of all the assemblies in the colonies where similar parochial libraries were established, appropriated public money toward the support of the library. A bill, quote, to secure the provincial library at Charlestown in Carolina, became a law of the colony on November 16, 1700, and the semi-public nature of that library was enshrined. The most important point of analysis in the literature is found in the research juxtaposing the nature of libraries in colonial New England to the Bray libraries of the American South. The literature concludes two things. One, that it was acceptable for Anglican ministers to make secular texts available to congregants through the establishment of libraries, because unlike Puritan clergy of New England, they fundamentally saw themselves as spiritual leaders, but not the sole source of intellectual authority. And two, that because New England was settled with a fundamentally anti-British sentiment, the reproduction of English life was non-existent, including characteristics associated with the gentry class interested in pursuing knowledge for practical ends and leisurely pursuit. In the end, the people of the southern colonies took little interest in adding to the libraries that were originally financed by the English. As the libraries became antiquated and worn, they lost their usefulness for both clergy and the lay alike. Scholars believe there were two flaws in Reverend Bray's plans. One, there were no real provisions made for addition of books from time to time to the libraries. And two, there was no disposition on the part of the people of the colonies to maintain and increase the libraries at their own expense. Or as we might say today, no mechanism for engendering an ongoing sense of ownership. No enduring infrastructure. In conclusion, there is little doubt concerning the immediate success of Reverend Bray's efforts in establishing libraries in the colonial South. Within a few years after his departure from Maryland in 1700, there were 30 parish libraries in that state alone. One of his greatest achievements in connection with the dissemination of books was the establishment of provincial libraries authorized and regulated by colonial state assemblies. But despite a certain amount of congruence between Reverend Bray's methods and the cultural landscape of the American South circa 1700, he is now considered to have been ahead of his time in building a movement on too narrow foundations, a movement that in the end may have been considered a foreign plant in a new land. Thank you.